Welcome to Legendary Upside Podcast. My name is Pat Corain. You can follow all of my content at legendaryupside.com. With me today, Sam Sherman and Sackreligious, and we're going to be doing a preview of Week 2. This is going to be like an ongoing thing where we dive into some of the most interesting situations that we're seeing out there in the fantasy football landscape for that week. This is partly driven by the work that I do writing up the walkthrough at legendaryupside.com. You can check that out. It's up now. The first game is completely free, and then I cover the rest of the games from the DraftKings Sunday main slate. Not necessarily a DFS article, just kind of break down what I think is going to happen in real life for each game. But you guys are also deep in the weeds here. We got Sackreligious crushing in the BR streets. Sam Sherman's breaking down film, pairing it with stats. So we're going to have a fun discussion here. But yeah, Sam's going to be kind of guiding us through the things we want to highlight. So I'll kick it over to you, Sam.
Great. Thanks, Pat. And yeah, thanks for welcoming me to this channel. I'm excited to be doing the show. And like Pat said, we'll be covering, I'd say, 6 to 10 situations each week, the things that look most interesting heading into the Sunday main slate, discussing some of the big news from the prior week that may tie into that. So let's go ahead and get started here. Pittsburgh at Denver. I want to talk through the Justin Fields quarterback situation in Pittsburgh. Just got news that Russell Wilson is officially questionable. It does look like Fields is going to get the start this week. So assuming he starts, I'm curious, starting with you, Pat, how bullish are you for Fields' ceiling after what we saw in Week 1 against the Falcons?
Well, I mean, I think he fits what they're trying to do pretty well. They had a huge play action rate. They ran play action on 54% of his dropbacks, which was the highest on the week. They were run heavy. They were able to play from ahead and actually dictate the run. The defense looks really good. So, I think he is sort of like the platonic ideal of a Arthur Smith quarterback in Arthur Smith's mind anyway, in some ways. Obviously, they kind of want to hide him a little bit in terms of the EPA stuff. He did not look all that good. So I don't know. I don't know that his ceiling is maybe as high as we were hoping, like when we were imagining him winning or at least when I was imagining winning him this job, because the volume is just going to be fairly contained in a lot of weeks. Now, if they get pushed and he has to run, I do think he obviously has that blow-up spike week ability because of the big play rushing ability. But this probably isn't one of those games. I think they're going to be kind of similar to last week, where they'll probably be able to win this game.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do agree that we saw like a more controlled version of Justin Fields in Week 1. Obviously, it was just a 1-week sample, but I thought Arthur Smith did a really good job of hiding Justin Fields' flaws in a way that we didn't really see in Chicago. If you look at his passing chart from that game, he was basically not throwing over the middle of the field at all. It was a lot of kind of like 1 or 2 half-field read progressions there for Justin Fields. Really simplified things for him, and that worked in terms of real NFL football. It wasn't as fun in terms of the gunslinging Justin Fields that we saw at times in Chicago. Curious for you, Sack. I guess same question about Justin Fields' ceiling, and then if you are playing him in DFS or maybe Battle Royale contests, are there any pass catchers that you're particularly excited about stacking with Justin Fields?
Yeah, I think the ceiling still exists in the way that we saw it in Chicago. I just don't think you'll be able to get it as frequently as when he was in Chicago, just because of the lower passing volume that we're going to get in the Arthur Smith offense. But Fields had 12 rush attempts last week.
Yeah.
And in games where he has had double-digit rush attempts, he averages 25 fantasy points a game. So the ceiling's still there. Now, I think that the way that you get a ceiling outcome from Fields in this offense is you're going to need to have a really big play from a receiver where they're going to – it's most likely, if I was going to have to pick the way it gets there, it's going to be like a George Pickens takes a slant to the house kind of thing, or George Pickens mosses a guy deep and gets a deep touchdown or something. And that's how you actually access a ceiling game from Justin Fields. I just don't think those events happen all that often. but you do get the really safe floor of this guy's going to rush the ball a lot. And I think that Arthur Smith sees that as a feature, not a bug. Like, he's pretty happy about the fact that his quarterback's going to run the ball a lot. This week, specifically against the Broncos, I'm a little concerned. You get, Pat Surtain, who's very likely going to be covering George Pickens as the number one receiver for the Steelers. So I think there you're looking at maybe like the best pass catching option, especially like in a BR context where, there's limited ownership on guys, is probably going to be Pat Freiermuth, just because I could see that being like the easy outs for Fields. And the thing is, Freiermuth doesn't have to do very much to, like, the bar he has to clear to be good for you is much lower than the bar that, say, George Pickens would have to clear to be good for you. And the nice thing about that, specifically, I'm thinking about the Dog Bowl, which is, 12-man drafts instead of the 6-man drafts. In the 6-man drafts, I'm like slightly less interested in Justin Fields just because there's so many good quarterbacks. If only 6 are getting taken, it's hard for me to see him being, he has to beat out those top 6. And in the Dog Bowl, where you've got, number one, you have lower ownership on each of the elite quarterbacks because it's getting cut in half. You have 12 people drafting instead of 6. So only half the amount of Mahomes teams, half the amount of Lamar teams, right? And so really, you're not saying that Fields is the optimal quarterback. You're just saying that no one with those quarterbacks that are more likely to be optimal than Fields put together a lineup that has enough of the nuts that they're going to be able to beat your Fields thing, and he scores close enough that they're not separating, and you happen to find a path where you're able to get to the top. And I think the clearest way is doing it by stacking with Freiermuth, because you're saying tight end in general failed. These are my last 2-round picks in Justin Fields and Pat Freiermuth, and the receivers and running backs that other teams were taking in those last 2 rounds. My receivers and running backs dusted those guys and separated, and I just didn't lose a ton at quarterback and tight end. And so that's the way that I kind of see it as the way to play it.
I think another way to make a bit more of a ceiling case for Fields is, to what you guys talk about with him throwing in the middle of the field, where he didn't. So I talk about the splash zone a lot, which is 10 plus yards downfield and over the middle of the field. He didn't have a single one of those attempts. He didn't even attempt to throw to that part of the field last week. That's not typical of him. He's usually a much more aggressive passer. He only had a 9% deep passing rate. And so you're getting this thing where he was much more conservative than he was, but he was much more conservative last week than he typically has been. You're also looking at a Broncos defense that blitzed a lot last week, and Fields got blitzed a ton last season. He was the highest, he had the highest blitz rate of any quarterback last year. So the Broncos would probably run out a similar type of defensive game plan here where they're blitzing him. He was actually slightly more aggressive against the blitz than when not blitzed. So, I think the bigger thing is that you kind of have Fields has generally been a lot more aggressive than he was last week. Then you have a matchup in terms of the coverages that he's going to face that could potentially open up some big plays for him. So, I agree that it's going to have to come through like a big play, probably to Pickens, but maybe to Freiermuth. But I would say this matchup does at least give us the potential for that to happen, where, the blitz is going to add maybe a little bit more variance to some of these plays.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the Pickens thing, if I am looking for the ceiling for Justin Fields, I think that normally is going to come through splash plays to George Pickens. As Sack noted, the matchup with Pat Surtain in Denver, we saw him contain DK Metcalf pretty well last week. He is, I do think generally the shadow corner narrative is mostly overrated. Surtain is maybe one of the guys we do make an exception for. He really is one of the stronger cornerbacks in the league. So I think there'll be better weeks to attack the Fields Pickens stack. And I like the Freiermuth angle this week if you're playing Fields, or maybe even the naked Fields angle in DFS has a little bit more upside for me than playing through Pickens this week.
And Freiermuth, I just want to note real quick, he had 76% route participation last week. And, we had talked about, I kind of bought the idea that he was going to be in more of a rotation with Darnell Washington and stuff. We've seen Arthur Smith rotate his tight ends. We've seen him really prefer guys who can block and everything. But that wasn't the case week 1. So I think if you're nervous about Freiermuth, I would be a little less nervous after what we saw week 1. I think that was pretty encouraging that he was out there. That's not like an elite route participation for a tight end, but it's pretty good. It was 63rd percentile among tight ends last week.
Let's move on here to the Chargers backfield. The Chargers get a matchup at the Panthers this week, a team that did not look like they belonged on an NFL field, that actually got throttled by the New Orleans Saints in week 1. The current line is, before I checked on the show, is Chargers -6, so nearly full touchdown favorites there in Carolina. Starting with the Chargers backfield, curious, Crane, how much are you buying into J.K. Dobbins' week 1 breakout? How far up the rankings would you push Dobbins here? Is he sort of low-end RB2, high-end RB3? Where are you at with Dobbins in this matchup?
I think the nice thing about Dobbins is that he looked really good. He had those breakaway runs that he couldn't quite take to the house, but breaking into the open field is still pretty nice. In the first place, he has an elusive rating of 240 at the moment. It's a 0 to 100 scale. He's at 240. So it was a good week. It was a good week for Dobbins, and the Chargers get this Panthers run defense that looks pretty bad after 1 week. They're also they're going against like Kamara and Jamal Williams and stuff. So you want to apply context, it's small sample and all of that. But people ran all over the Panthers last year. This is not a good defense. They lost Brian Burns. Like if anything, they'd probably be worse than they were last year on defense. The offense looks terrible. They're probably not going to be able to push anyone off of a run heavy script. We know the Chargers want to run the ball a lot. I just think, it's very early. It's week 2, but the Panthers are a run funnel, guys. It's already happened.
Yeah,
people are going to run all over them. And this team really wants to run the ball. So from that stuff, it's great. I am a little concerned. He had 37% of the attempts. He had 58% of snaps, but only 37% of attempts. Gus Edwards got a big chunk. And so that's like where I would say I think he's kind of probably more of like a high-end RB3. Guys like Najee Harris, Tony Pollard, right? Like I'm actually a little bit more interested in them. It's just like I think they get a lot more volume than I think I can count on with Dobbins. But I don't know. I mean, we could also see after what Dobbins showed that they just like feed him this week. I think that's definitely possible.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting breakdown to watch. In some ways, you could argue it's kind of a tryout at running back for the Chargers right now. They don't really
you could argue that.
Yeah, they don't have any firm commitment to any of these guys. I do expect at some point even a guy like Kamani Vidal or maybe even Hassan Haskins maybe gets a chance in this backfield. So, yeah, difficult one to predict. Curious what you think on that, Sack. Or do you think, Dobbins has a chance to earn a bigger share of the rushing load this week, or do you share sort of similar concerns as Pat?
I mean, I think his share could increase because 37% isn't all that much. I just think that if you're counting on J.K. Dobbins to like totally win the backfield this season, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the Chargers probably want to deploy multiple backs in a committee. And I also don't really think they care how bad Gus Edwards is I think they will happily run Gus Edwards out there and have him have inefficient carry after inefficient carry. And I don't really think that bothers them all that much. So I think you need to be really bad for them to care. And as long as he's not putting the ball on the ground, it's going to be hard for Dobbins to get a huge workload. So I agree that he's not, it's going to be hard for him to get into RB2 and certainly not RB1 territory. The way I'm kind of interested in playing this game actually is not through the running backs, although that certainly seems like the most likely game script, but in the dog bowl, which is 72 picks deep. So you're starting to get down a lot deeper than you would in the normal 6-man VRs. Ladd McConkey goes undrafted and he had a lot of targets last week for, rookie coming out first game ever on an NFL field. And he looked good to me. I wouldn't be surprised at all if, you get an early lead from the Chargers through a Ladd McConkey score, and then they're going to run the ball. So the bet's a little thin because I don't think the Panthers can push them to where they're going to have to pass. So you're really banking on the early score goes to Ladd McConkey. So it's not something that I'm attacking super heavily, but it is a way where you're going to be one of the couple people with Ladd McConkey in the dog bowl. He is just not getting drafted. There's 2 other people that I've seen that draft him, but they're also, sick, twisted individuals, and they're trying to do the same kind of stuff that I am of getting these low-owned guys who do have access to a ceiling where, if you told me that Ladd McConkey could score 20 half PPR points this week, I'd say, yeah, that could happen because they're just beating the brakes off the Panthers, right? And then they give, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins a million carries to salt the game away.
Yeah, the McConkey shutout's interesting. This is such a tough matchup because they really probably aren't going to have to do much. But he had 32% targets per out run last week, which is awesome. I mean, that's not going to sustain. But I think a lot of what we're looking for with these rookies is we want them to get out there and flash like crazy high numbers that they couldn't possibly sustain, with the hopes that they start playing more. He only had 76% route participation. He has a lot of room to grow from there. I mean, he could, by the end of the season, be up in the 90s. That's kind of where we see full-time wide receivers. He only played 61% of his snaps from the slot as well. So he wasn't like glued into the slot. That's fairly high, but it's not like, he wasn't like 90%. He wasn't exclusively slot. So I thought it was very encouraging for McConkey. I'm excited about him. I'm not excited about this passing game, though. They didn't run any play action. Which is really weird. Like they're built around the run. They have Justin Herbert. They only ran play action on 11% of their dropbacks. Like it's kind of like embarrassing. It was tied with Geno Smith for the second lowest in the league last week, which is also like concerning for the Seahawks in my opinion. But then only Kirk Cousins was lower. They didn't run play action a single time.
Well, he physically couldn't. He physically couldn't even get back there and fake the handoff. That's why.
That actually might be the most concerning part for Cousins' health is that they didn't run play action once. So I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely thinking this game is really kind of a slog, but I do like the McConkey shutout. And I would say if Underdog ever opens up like 24-man drafts, then we could think about Hayden Hurst because he was out there for 79% of routes. He's one of these, a bunch of guys that like all surprisingly ran like 75% or more of routes at tight end who didn't get targeted like at all. But he is in that mix. He's, I think right now kind of in that like super dart throw mix. I don't know how you use that information, but
yeah, I don't know how you profit off that, but
I don't think you can.
He's a good, like,
if you're doing like any single game slates on a game at 1 p.m., this maybe do that.
He'd be a good like showdown play, or maybe tight end premium if he's available on your waiver wire. Stash him. I will say on McConkey, he's a guy I like the chat out. He's a guy I'm really excited for the rest of the season. I thought the numbers look good. I also did sort of in-depth film breakdown on him from last week, and you can check out that on Establish Run. But the bottom line is, I think he did show an ability to get open on deeper routes. None of them ended up really being successful in that game for various reasons, but I don't think he's just like the gimmicky slot, white slot wide receiver that it might look like from the numbers. He definitely does do some of that.
How scrappy
stuff.
did he look on tape? Did you think he looked real scrappy?
It was really tough not
just
to.
A real lunch pail player.
Yeah,
Julian Edelman comparison. So hard not to say that, but I think bottom line is I think he's good. I think they're going to be much better matchups to play him, but I do trust Sack has a good sense of the ownership and stuff in those contests, so I do trust and default to his read there. Let's move on to the Ravens versus the Raiders. The Ravens are playing at home in this matchup. I think one of the hot button fantasy topics of this whole week has been the Ravens tight end room after that Thursday night performance where Isaiah Likely maybe looked like the tight end one in Baltimore. People are at least having that conversation. Start with you here, Karain. Do we think a flippening of Likely over Andrews is on the table, or is that a crazy week one overreaction?
I mean, it definitely feels like an overreaction to me, but when we were out in Vegas drafting these high stakes teams, that's exactly what happened. Likely immediately flipped Andrews and by a pretty wide margin. And we were actually in a draft where it was a standalone draft. And so, it wasn't a main event where you're drafting against essentially all these other teams that have been drafted throughout the tournament because you're going to compete against them in a sprint. You just got to win this 12-team league. And he went in the 7th round, Andrews. Because, I think there's some idea of if you're in a tournament and other people have 2nd round Andrews and you can get him in the 5th, that's a pretty big advantage. But that was an interesting data point. Now that means we passed on him. We got Stephon Diggs, who fell super late in the late six, so we took him. But I would have been pounding the table for Andrews there. And I mean, honestly, I've thought about that a lot. Like he shouldn't have fallen that far. I think it. Andrews had 75% route participation. Likely it was at 69%, so he was out there a little bit more. Wasn't that high end, like elite 85% route participation that we want to see from a guy like Andrews, but it wasn't super far off. It was really that just played both guys a lot. He had 45% double coverage rate. That was up there with what we saw from like Jamar Chase last week, Justin Jefferson. They were really focused on taking him away. And then the Ravens passing offense was kind of struggling to get the ball downfield, and we were seeing a lot of scrambles from Lamar. And he was fine. He was finding Likely, and Likely had a great game. I don't want to take that away, but I'm still of the mind that Andrews will be the top tight end here. It's not good, right? Like Likely looks really good and is going to play enough to where Andrews probably isn't like that in that true elite role. But yeah, I mean, he was going so late in drafts that I still actually feel fine about having him.
Yeah.
It's just more that I think we probably would have taken him in more like the Kittle range if we knew like that, that late fifth kind of range if we knew what we know now, I think.
That's kind of similar to how I view it. I still, we did our rest of season rankings at Leg Up over the past couple of days. We still have Mark Andrews over Isaiah Likely. I did put Likely and Andrews in the same tier, sort of a tier 3 of tight ends. That includes Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid, Mark Andrews, and it's Isaiah Likely. I kind of would view Kittle, Bowers, Kelsey, Laporta a tier ahead of both the Ravens tight ends. But yeah, that's my best assessment after week 1. I will say a couple other things on Likely, some kind of crazy stats. He's had 14 games where he's gotten over 60% route participation and has cleared 18 PPR points in 6 of those 14 games. That's just an insane hit rate. He's kind of Greg Dortchian in the sense that you look at his targets per route run stats and like nothing is that impressive. And even including this past week, his career targets per route run is like 17%. But in the games where he gets a big role, he gets a big role, if that makes sense. So he seems to run a lot of empty routes when he's not a part of the game plan. But week 1 this year, he clearly was a part of the game plan. I thought he looked really good. But I do agree with all those notes on Andrews. Really high double team rate. The blitzing and pressure that KC was able to put on the Ravens really forced Lamar just to get the ball out quickly. Tons of Justice Hill targets, tons of Likely targets in the flat where he's basically like uncovered in 2-minute drill stuff. So I think there's some flukiness to Likely's week 1 performance, but at the same time, if you're telling me next week we have more confidence that Likely is the guy over Andrews, I also don't think you're completely crazy. So I think
I would say, Zay Flowers did not have that great of a game. Rashad Bateman didn't do anything. So I think that's part of it where my takeaway is sort of less about, it was just a weird game for Likely than I still think there's room for Andrews I think Andrews is very good. And if Flowers isn't going to really emerge as like a big time playmaker, which he had the chance to, they're double teaming Andrews, and instead of going to Flowers a lot, they're going to Likely. Flowers was double covered on 27% of his routes. That was 60th percentile among wide receivers. It wasn't like nothing, but it wasn't a ton. He only had 17% targets per route run, 23% target share is okay, but his ADOT was super low at 4.6. Yards per route run of 0.77. I mean, it was not a good game from Flowers. So that's, I think, Likely can hit without it coming directly against Andrews failing because they're both running a lot of routes.
Yeah, they're both more or less full-time players in this offense, or at least 70% players. I do think, the Ravens O-line, that's a big red flag from week 1. If the Chiefs or if other teams are able to do what the Chiefs did and force Lamar to like scramble or throw the ball to the checkdowns immediately, this is going to be a pretty weird offense. But we'll see in week 2. Close with your Sack. Any closing thoughts on the Ravens tight end room or any other angles from the Ravens passing game?
Yeah, I think the stuff like the trends that are being pointed out about the Ravens, like the Zay Flowers super low ADOT, the Isaiah Likely getting lots of work, the Ravens 12 personnel rate being extremely high. I think so much of that is just because of their opponent. It was an adjustment to the Chiefs. The Chiefs, and also it was, part of the Ravens' weakness on their offensive line is right up the middle, which is where Chris Jones was just absolutely proving why he is worth every penny that he gets paid. And so I think the Ravens recognize like, we're going to be in trouble here. Let's do a lot of 12 personnel to help, get a little chipping done from Isaiah Likely, because Andrews is lined up, out wide quite a bit on his snaps. He wasn't in line very much. And so you get that 12 personnel there to get a little assistance with the pass rush, give Lamar a little bit more time. You have the low ADOT stuff from Zay Flowers as the manufactured, get the ball out. Let's not, get in trouble here because the Chiefs are going to be able to pressure us. And then what you saw with the Likely stuff was when Lamar was able to extend the plays and make Lamar magic happen, Andrews is double covered. Zay Flowers is doing this low ADOT stuff. And so the only guys that you're really there that you're looking at is, okay, down the field, the play's broken down, who's available. He's looking at Rashad Bateman, and wisely he's saying, nah. and then he's seeing Isaiah Likely. And so to me, it all logically fits together. The story that is told there makes a lot of sense. And so I think it might be more of a blip on the radar than like a long-term trend. Really, though, if you want my opinion on how the Likely stuff plays out over the course of the season, I think the Ravens do use this elevated 12 personnel rate more, especially in circumstances where, they're up against a strong pass rush. I think that they probably have correctly identified that Isaiah Likely is their third best pass catcher. So if anything, it's bad for the fringier pass catching options on the Ravens, which has kind of always been the case for the Ravens. And yet every year we kind of come back for more. And we're like, surely this year Rashad Bateman will do something. Sure,
Likely's a fringier pass catching option, and he looks like a smash.
Right. I guess I'm saying he's broken into the inner circle now for the Ravens, is what I'm saying. And so I think that you're going to end up with a pretty concentrated offense that's running through Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers in the passing game. And then who I really think is going to be the story of this week, like here's a hot take. No one is going to talk about Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely next week because they're going to be too busy talking about the absolute shellacking the big dog puts on the Raiders. This sets up to be the prime, oh no, we overreacted to Derrick Henry's role in week 1 against a strong interior rush defense on the Chiefs. Now they're playing the Raiders, who the Chargers just ran all over. Like J.K. Dobbins with one leg was just running all over the Raiders. And so I think that we could see the big dog get right here, maybe get a couple touchdowns. So that's kind of how I see this game going.
I love that call. I mean, Henry was facing stacked boxes a lot last week. That was 38% of his carries. He saw 8+ defenders in the box, which is the 4th highest mark of the week. Within that context, and this is NFL Next Gen's rush yards over expected, helps account for that. He was efficient. He had 4 rush yards over expected. He had a 46% success rate in rush yards over expected, which is really good. So Henry still looked like Henry last week. They just weren't able to lean on him. And I think they lean on him here. I mean, they're almost like 10-point home favorites against the Raiders. Like they're going to establish the run. So I think you're right. We probably keep arguing about Likely versus Andrews because it's going to be like a smaller pie, and one of them is going to get a little bit more of the other. And we're going to say, oh, see, Andrews is dead, or oh no, it actually Likely was a mirage. But the point, that's not going to be the point. The point is that Henry's a great play this week.
That makes a lot of sense. Ravens should be favored big in that game. Let's move on here to the Lions against the Bucs. I want to talk here about the Lions passing attack. Obviously, in week 1, one of the biggest storylines was Jameson Williams had a huge breakout game. He had a target share of 30% in week 1. His max target share in any game before that was 22%, and he only had an above 15% target share twice in his career up into that point. Jumps all the way up to 30% in week 1. So clearly a big change on the horizon for Jameson Williams' role. starting with you here, Pat, what are the big takeaways from Jameson's week 1 breakout? Can we expect that to continue in week 2 versus the Bucs?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely impressive. I think one of the most impressive things is that he was out there like all the time, 94% route participation. I wouldn't have really thought that was like necessarily even in the range. Like I thought he was going to be, kind of more like last year where he's rotating in a little bit, but he's like a full-time outside receiver for them. He had a 30% target share. So it's pretty nice. I think long-term, Williams is looking like a really nice pick. You're happy to have him. I don't know that this is necessarily the game where you're most excited about him because when I wrote up this game, really jumped out. You got Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles typically blitzes. They blitzed the most of any team last week as well. And so you're going to see, Goff has traditionally gotten blitzed, and I think you're going to see a fair amount of that. And he tends to go to Amon-Ra St. Brown in those situations. So I'm actually really excited about St. Brown's ability to kind of just rack up targets in this game and against a defense that looks pretty bad overall. Like it's like you get the nice double whammy here where you're getting a style of defense that probably favors Goff getting the ball out quickly to St. Brown in these blitz situations. But then also this defense currently ranks 30th in drop back success rate against. They're 26th in EPL out per drop back through only 1 week. But I mean, they're going against a rookie quarterback who ran a lot, but still they came away with 24th in coverage grade. So it wasn't just about the rushing element. They did not look good in coverage. So, Williams can always get there with, a play or two, but to me, this really sets up as a game where St. Brown could just get fed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. The only thing I'll add on JMO is that I thought a really encouraging part of his week 1 results was that it was not just the deep shots where he's had success in the past. It was design touches on end arounds, design touches on screens, schemed up, speed motion looks for him, schemed up looks where he was running drag routes against zone coverage where he just torched players after the catch. So it really was a varied route tree. And I do agree that I think most of the blitz beating stuff that should be going to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. I do think they have more short area stuff designed for Jameson Williams than they've had in years past. So I think there's a chance, he could still get there as well. Curious what you think, Sack, either on Jameson Williams or other ways to attack the Lions passing game.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to be the Jameson Williams permable, but reading Pat's walkthrough definitely made me consider making sure that I'm eating my vegetables with Amon-Ra. He was less fun for me to click. It's so fun to click the exciting, shiny new guy in Jameson Williams. But I think Pat's right that this does set up to be a really good spot for Amon-Ra. I just think in general, this game could set up to be a really good game to target. I wouldn't be against doing, Goff double stacks and just saying that this game ends up going off. Because for the Bucs, I think this is going to be a pretty telling game for the Bucs because they played such a putrid opponent in Washington last week. And their division is also pretty putrid. Just purely from the fact that you have the Panthers in there, like that already makes your division one of the.
That's all you need to make them the worst division in the league. It literally doesn't matter what the other 3 teams are. So,
and then you could be with the Panthers and Chiefs, and it's already one of those.
Yeah, and so if the Falcons also can't get their stuff together, then the Bucs kind of look like they might have the clear path to being the division winner there. And so this is a strong opponent that is like a legitimate test, in my opinion. This is one of the stronger teams in the NFC in the Lions. And so I think this might be a sneaky, exciting game. This might end up being like a playoff preview. And I kind of think that both these teams feel the same way too. So I'd be interested in kind of attacking this game, not shy at all about doing Goff double stacks here, and really just mixing it up with the pass catchers, probably with a preference towards Amon-Ra there, but like willing to play it through Laporta, willing to play it through Jameson as well. I love the running game for the Lions as well, because they just showed like if we want to exert our will, if we're in a circumstance where we need to run the ball, we will. Like it couldn't matter any less to the Lions, like who you have on the other side of the ball in the trenches. They are just going to move you. They will displace you, and they will run for what is needed. And I think that that's going to be a theme this year. Like when it comes down to it, the Lions are going to show they can get that done. So yeah, I just want to attack. I want to attack this game. I want all the pieces on the Lions.
Yeah. Go ahead, Crane.
Well, no, I just think that's exactly right with the run game. Like I think the running backs here are also really interesting. In part because like some of the stuff I talk about with the blitz is that Goff last year against the blitz only had a 6.4 ADOT. That was higher than only Mac Jones and Jake Browning. He attempted 20-plus yard passes on just 5.9% of his attempts. Again, besting only Jake Browning and Mac Jones. So it's like, I think I agree with you. I do agree with you that Williams will get used more in intermediate stuff, but the passing game could be like a lot of short, quick throws. We know that Amon-Ra can feast on that. So like if you give me an Amon-Ra 5.08 out, I'm like, okay, how many targets? I'm not bothered. How many targets? But that obviously could be really good for Jahmyr Gibbs. I think his week 1 usage was pretty encouraging in the passing game, and not bad necessarily in the running game either. But his passing game usage is obviously what we're excited about. And then Montgomery. I mean, he could be the way that the touchdowns go through. And then on the other side, I think the Bucs are really interesting because I'm not sure who they are yet. They had this really short, quick passing attack last week. We didn't really think that the Commanders were going to have a great pass rush. So that could just be like the Bucs kind of getting out in front of offensive line concerns maybe. Or that was a very specific game plan last week, and they're going to let Baker Mayfield have a little bit more time to throw. But he was getting the ball out really quick, 2.4 seconds time to throw, and had just a 5 ADOT. His average depth of completion was just 4.4 yards. So I'm like, what was that? Was that who you are? Was that a game plan? Because I think it has a lot of implications with, do we want to play this through Chris Godwin or do we want to play this through Mike Evans? Mike Evans had the 2 touchdowns, but if they're going to do that quick passing game stuff a lot, then I actually think Godwin is just going to feast. And he had a 4.4 ADOT last week. So he is kind of the guy that runs through. Jalen McMillan, I mean, it's an encouraging debut for him, but he had a 17.7 ADOT. He only ran out of the slot 41% of the time. So I think that, you can kind of decide who you think the Bucs are if you're like doing stacks with this game and play it through Evans or play it through Godwin. I think both have kind of high ceilings. So I'm not sure. Like, I think there's a fair amount of variance in terms of like what this team ends up being.
Yeah. I'm really curious for both these teams in week 2. Sometimes in week 1, what we don't know is how bad the defenses are that these teams are playing. I think there's a chance we look back and say the Commanders, who the Bucs walloped last week, and the Rams, who the Lions crushed last week, are 2 of the worst defenses in the league. I am still bullish on both these offenses, but I'm keeping that in the back of my mind as well, that those are not 2 of the better defenses in terms of expectations this year in the NFL. Let's move on here to the Saints at the Cowboys. The Saints pass game, I think, is really interesting. We didn't get to see a lot of it in week 1. Again, going back to the Panthers being a terrible NFL franchise, the Saints ran them out of the building easily in like the first quarter last week. We saw the deep shot to Rashid Shaheed. Besides that, Derek Carr, frankly, didn't really need to play much football. It was a lot of running the ball, especially in the second half. Chris Olave had a disappointing week 1 because they didn't really need him. So, yeah, it almost feels like week 1 all over again in some ways for the Saints pass game. How encouraged should we be, Crane, about their week 1 performance, or are we chalking it up to Panthers are bad?
I mean, I think you have to chalk some of it up to Panthers are bad. Like, this is like the ultimate, like, I'm going to need to see it again, And they, some of these teams, they, the Chargers, right? Like, I'm like, the Chargers, I don't believe this. But then they get the Panthers this week. So I'm like, well, they're going to be fine. But you're getting the Cowboys now. So I think that the Saints, it's a big difference. I would say one of the things that really jumped out to me in the walkthrough is that Carr had a fairly slow time to throw, and that wasn't a problem. 2.83 seconds time to throw last week. He's getting the ball downfield, really aggressive. He's throwing deep passes on 17% of his dropbacks, which is pretty high. And he was not getting pressured, though, but he wasn't taking that long to get the ball out. So he's sitting back there, not getting pressured, chucking it deep, and then he has an 83% completion percentage, despite having a pretty deep 9.5 ADOT. He had a 16% completion percentage over expected. So a lot of things went right? You get time to throw, no pressure, you chuck it deep, and you complete all your passes. Like, hell yeah, let's go. But is that going to happen again against the Cowboys? It's a kind of a big regression spot, I think. Even if the Saints are like much better than we thought, this could be a regression spot for sure.
Yeah, and this tests like the who is the Saints underneath short area target that we had a lot of questions about going into the season. Both Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed historically do not profile as short area targets. So yeah, I don't think we got an answer to that question in week one and who they're going to look for over the middle of the field. Curious what you think, Zach. The Saints passing attack should look way different in week two. Do you have any takes on how that's going to play out?
Yeah, I think to frame it first, I want to talk about the Cowboys' biggest weakness on defense and what it's been for the last couple of years. They've tried to address this for multiple years and just haven't gotten it right yet. But the Saints also don't really have the personnel to attack their biggest weakness, which is runs up the middle. The Cowboys have really struggled. I mean, if you remember the playoff game that they got absolutely embarrassed by Green Bay last year, if you just ran up the middle, there was no stopping it, right? It was just over and over Aaron Jones just absolutely destroying their defense. So the problem for the Saints is Alvin Kamara is not a super efficient rusher. He'll probably get a lot of this short area passing stuff that we're talking about, though. Jamal Williams, sure, run him up the middle. He's going to get all 2 yards every time, right? So it's like the thing that the Cowboys are weak against, I don't know that the Saints have the personnel to take advantage of. The only wrinkle to that would be if the Saints properly identify that and then decide to attack it using Taysom Hill, who I think is probably their best between the tackles rusher as far as like the ability to punish a defense where that's your weakness and like actually break an explosive play. Because like, let's be honest, Jamal Williams is not breaking an explosive play. Like he might get you 8 yards on a really good carry. And so that's just something where the Cowboys would be glad to take that, right? If the Saints aren't able to punish them there. So I think the game's going to come down to, do the Saints figure out that they need to run Taysom Hill up the middle and just basically treat him as a running back this game? If not, I think you're going to see a lot of short area stuff to Alvin Kamara, which is the most frustrating answer for who is the Saints' short area passing answer. But that's what it was last year. And I mean, I know we didn't get a great example week one with them playing the Panthers, but to me, that's kind of what it looked like in week one when they were still throwing. So I think that's the unfortunate answer. But it'll be interesting. I think you could get into a situation where the Saints just get pushed so much that they're just having to chuck it deep again. And it's kind of a throw caution to the wind. Let's air it out because there's no other way we're coming back from this game.
Yeah. And I am open a little bit to Alvin Kamara having a better ceiling than we saw last year. Clint Kubiak, the new offensive coordinator coming over for the 49ers, obviously in the Shanahan system, they have a lot of experience in getting these sort of multi-positional players involved. Christian McCaffrey, both as a running back and a receiver, Deebo Samuel, both as a running back and receiver. I obviously don't think Alvin Kamara is that level of player at this point in his career, but I do think there'll be some more interesting scheming to get him involved in the pass game, not just the, behind the line of scrimmage dump offs for 4 yards that we saw over and over again last year. Maybe there's some more creative scheming for him in the pass game. Any last thoughts, Grain? Otherwise we'll move on to the next game.
No, I sadly came to the same conclusion that Kamara was kind of the way to play this game. Because I think they will try to run the ball more this week. And there were, I would say, a fair amount of like disappointing offensive coordinator debuts last week.
Yes.
Clint Kubiak was not one of them. Clint Kubiak, I thought they ran play action 36% of the time. That's something they really didn't do last year. Pete Carmichael last year with Carr, they had a 14% play action rate. That was the lowest in the league. 36% with where they were at last week would have led the NFL last season. So big jump. And that, I think is indicative of like some other stuff. It's not like if you're going to make that kind of jump, you're redesigning some things in the offense and hopefully in the sharp direction. It was a fairly low bar here.
You can't get worse than Pete Carmichael. That offense last year, inexcusably bad and archaic.
Yeah. So everything you said about them maybe scheming up stuff, I agree with all of that. Like, I think we were optimistic. Generally, we're optimistic in the summer. That's part of the fun of it. But I'm like, I don't know about this. Are the Seahawks going to be any better designed, or or does that just hope? This doesn't feel like hope. I think the Saints, even though I do expect them to take a big step back, going from the Panthers to the Cowboys, I was very encouraged by the Clint Kubiak offense.
Got it. Let's move on here to another big storyline. Unfortunately, kind of a negative storyline in fantasy. Puka Nacua goes out pretty early in week 1. I guess the story we're going with is it was a re-injury of the knee injury. Don't need to rehash all of that, but some questionable injury reporting there in Los Angeles. I want to ask, looking forward, who is going to step up in place of Puka Nacua? There's a lot of answers to the test on this one. Tyler Johnson, Demarcus Robinson are sort of the main ones. I think you can go deeper and even take a look at Jordan Whittington, the rookie who looked impressive in the preseason. Tutu Atwell, who was fun at times last year before getting replaced by Demarcus Robinson. And even you can make a case for Colby Parkinson, the full-time tight end in the Rams offense, seeing more designed looks without Puka Nacua out there. Obviously, the obvious answer is just more Kupp, but keeping it focused on the secondary pass catchers, starting with you, Sack. Is there anyone you're interested in at all? Are you kind of ignoring this question and getting another week of data before, making a claim on one of these secondary guys in Los Angeles?
Yeah, not super interested in the secondary options. I really think that it's just going, because we've seen Stafford do this before. Like, oh no, my secondary option went down. That's okay. The primary option can just get double the work. That's fine. And it's not like it happened once or twice as a fluke. It's like, nope, that's what happened all last year. Cooper Kupp's not here. Puka Nacua, how do you feel about 23 targets a game? So I think what you're going to see is more concentration, which is already a hyper concentrated offense. You're going to get more Kupp. I think you'll get more Kyren Williams involved in the passing game. And of these secondary guys, like the way that if you force me to play one, I'm going to do it through Colby Parkinson, again, for kind of the same thesis of the Pat Freiermuth play that I discussed earlier. The bar is just so much lower to clear. So just a touchdown to Colby Parkinson and you're pretty happy. Where with these other guys, you need more raw points from your wide receiver positions in whatever format it is that you're playing, be it DFS or Battle Royale or what have you, or even your home leagues. You need more raw points from the receiver position than you do from the tight end. So it's just a lot easier for Colby Parkinson to get there. And so if you made me pick one of these secondary guys, I think that's the way that I would do it.
I agree with that. I think they're all interesting waiver stashes. I do not feel good enough about starting them in DFS or your weekly redraft league. I think you got to wait a week. I do think I maybe disagree slightly in that, when Cooper Kupp went out last year through the first 7 weeks of the season, Tutu Atwell was sort of in the wide receiver 3 range. Then when Kupp was banged up later in the year, Demarcus Robinson was actually a viable play at times. So I do think someone will emerge. I'm not willing to make a bet on who that is in week 1 because ultimately I don't think it's like the highest upside role. I do think there will be like a fantasy viable role that does emerge without Puka. Crane, any thoughts on the secondary guys or Parkinson, as Sack pointed out, as his preferred way to play it?
Yeah, we added in our high stakes stuff. We put in bids for Tyler Johnson, and I think he's somewhat interesting. I mean, to have 21% targets per route run last week, he had 2.39 yards per route run, and he's the guy that could see the field a lot more. Robinson was at 92% route participation. Johnson was only at 65%. So with Kupp leaving, with Nacua out, then that opens up routes in addition to potentially targets. And so Johnson, I'm intrigued by this kind of like I kind of want to see it. I don't think I'm taking stabs this week, but he's the guy where I'm like I'm more intrigued by him than Robinson in terms of like what his ceiling could be in this offense. The Rams are maybe looking for different stuff than I know to look for at receiver. You know, like they were into Van Jefferson, right? They like Cup was like not D2, but I guess FCS school, and very productive, but like not, you know, an older prospect. He's a superstar. Nacua was a 5th round guy, superstar. So, you know, they've got a thing, and it works a lot. Johnson was actually one of these guys that, you know, from the metrics side, we really liked, but he's never been anything. But like, I don't know, he looked pretty good.
Yeah, he was a RotoViz darling, like 5 years ago or something, right?
Yeah, him and Rashad Bateman went to Minnesota together, and they were both supposed to be stars. And it turns out that maybe in like year 6 or something, Johnson might actually deliver. But I would also say Parkinson is interesting. He had 82% route participation. Didn't really get targeted, but that's good. Like, I thought he was going to be in a rotation a little bit more with Davis Allen, maybe more like in the 65-70% range. So I'm excited about him just getting a lot of playing time, getting treated like a true like tight end starter, and with targets potentially opening up. That's nice. But Sack, you kind of had me in the first half with the Kyren thing when you said he'd get used more. I don't think he'll really get used more in the passing game, but I think one of the ways that we can see the Rams transition here is they just like run it more with Kyren. And Kyren, I mean, 91% of the snaps last week. It's the exact same thing. Like, they're just doing it again. They said they weren't doing it again, and then they played Ronnie Rivers ahead of Blake Corum. Like, they are. they at least for this week, like, they're just going to do it again. And I think they could run the ball here against the Cardinals. And so that's one way, is that they're just like, and I mean, McVay, you know, he's a sharp coach, really well-designed passing game, but he's never really like embraced the pass in that like Chiefs style way. Like, they're always pretty balanced in terms of like pass rate over expected and stuff. So I would expect, you know, a decent workload in general. And then, you know, with Nacua out, that's one way where they just load up Kyren with a few more carries.
Yeah. Last thing I will make, just like, this is a really deep, you know, $1 ad in a main event or other deep format. I do think Jordan Whittington is still interesting to add. He had a touchdown last week on his first touch. It was called back for a hold. He kind of got an end around. I thought he looked good in the play. I thought he looked really good in the preseason. I don't think he's going to have a stable role like this week or necessarily next week, but I wouldn't put it past Sean McVay to shuffle these guys in and out. If he feels like he needs more juice and upside on the field, I think there's a chance we still see more of Whittington. I agree. They like him. So yeah, deep ad there. Let's move on to our second to last game that we're going to talk through, Chicago at Houston. Caleb Williams was one of many disastrous quarterback performances in week 1. Got a lot of people worried about his rest of season outlook, the receivers' rest of season outlook. I'm curious, starting with you, Pat, do you have any takes on what happened week 1, why it went so poorly for Caleb Williams versus the Titans? And are you worried about this going forward, or do you think it's just week 1 for a rookie? Let's cut him a break. Let's move on to the next week and see what he has.
I mean, it's definitely like more inefficient than I was hoping it would be. I think the Titans defense could ultimately end up looking pretty good. So I don't want to like freak out about it. But
David Kitchen was on that early, by the way. I should give him credit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing I like kind of watching, and I was like, you know, one of his superpowers is like the ability to kind of scramble around and make stuff happen. But the making the stuff happen wasn't happening as much as we thought it would. So that's where, you know, I think probably the game kind of slowing down for him over the next couple of weeks will be something we can expect to happen. I guess the big question is how much are targets consolidating.
Yeah. What receivers have you been playing this week?
Right.
Yeah. I should have teed that up. Both DJ Moore both Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze are questionable. It could be a sneaky DJ Moore alpha spot. I guess, yeah. Do you have any early leans on whether those guys are playing? Or, yeah, I guess imagine a scenario maybe where DJ Moore is the only guy in that game. I think he would project for 30% plus target share, right? It could be a sneaky under the radar alpha game because of how bad that offense looked in week 1. Any thoughts on that, Grant?
My assumption has been that Allen is going to go, but I guess that's, you know, we're recording this before the Friday injury report. So, yeah. But I mean, it would make, I think targets would consolidate. Unless, I mean, we want to be open-minded to the idea of Shane Waldron playing Gerald Everett over DJ Moore.
Yeah. That's God. Shane Waldron, he's on my list of offensive coordinators to monitor, let's say, this season. Sack, I know you were pretty bearish on Caleb Williams in our rest of season rankings conversation. Anything to add there on his week 1 performance?
I think there's going to be growing pains, and I think they're exacerbated by having Shane Waldron as your coach. I'm not saying that Caleb's a bad player or anything like that. I just think that he got dealt a bad hand for the
And we thought he got dealt a good hand.
Yeah.
That's, I think, where maybe like we're going to have like this, this thing that we got to get through now. We got to actually swing back to like, actually maybe this situation, because this situation was supposed to be like the best for any rookie quarterback in like history.
We thought it was so good because of the weapons, but what kind of made it past our rose-colored glasses was the offensive line and the incompetent offensive coordinator. And the offensive coordinator thing, I'm not one to say, like, I think in the majority of circumstances, coaching doesn't matter. It's just at the fringes, the outliers that matter, like the best coaches in the league and the worst coaches in the league. And I just wasn't quick enough to put Shane Waldron in as one of the worst offensive coordinators in the league. But like, if this week looks similar to last week, he will firmly be in my one of the worst offensive coordinators in the league camp. Yeah. And so that's why I'm the most concerned about Caleb Williams. Is nothing to do with him as a player or his talent. I just think that you're going to end up with his growth being stunted. And so maybe he's the kind of guy later in the season where, I hate being the kind of person who's like, I need to see it before I play it, because that's not usually how you win in fantasy football. You need to be able to be ahead of the curve there. And so I would just say I want to be really cautious on waiting too long on Caleb, but at the same time, I need to see something just a little encouraging. Like I need to see him able to operate behind that bad offensive line, or him able to operate in spite of the bad play calling or play design. So I think I'm going to be a slow adopter to Caleb, but when I see something that's encouraging, I don't want to be so slow to then flip the switch and be willing to play him, because I don't want to be the person who's waiting too long and then you miss the boat on a big Caleb game.
And we saw with CJ Stroud, like it started like not so great, and then it got better, and then all of a sudden he's like a star. So I could totally see Caleb Williams, that being like his trajectory as well. But his success rate last week was worse than Bryce Young's. So like that's kind of putting some numbers to what I felt like I was watching, where he was just having trouble being that same playmaker, and he's going to try to make plays in those situations, but it didn't really translate consistently with a really bad 34% success rate last week. Another number here that I think is pretty interesting. He had a 7.8 ADOT, which is fairly deep, not like crazy deep, but he wasn't like super conservative. But his average depth of completion was just 2.7 yards. So you're looking at like that big difference. That's a 5.1 yard difference between his average depth of target and his average depth of completion. So to me, that's sort of like a signal of sort of a discombobulated passing.
Yeah,
this is not an fit. They're trying deep throws, but like it's not working. So as far as like you're saying, you want to see it before you play it. I mean, we don't have to see the production, but I would like to see some underlying numbers that make me feel like, okay, this is moving in the right direction. Is kind of where I'm at on Caleb right now for this, in the very, very short term.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. And yeah, I mean, Shane Waldron better figure it out. He better take Gerald Everett off the field. Also, there was so much of this like pre-snap motion scheming up Keenan Allen for like 2 ADOT targets in week 1. I get that's what the Chargers did last year when they had Keenan Allen, and that was kind of their last resort tactic to get a competent offense going. I don't like seeing an offense rely on that super heavily when you have DJ Moore, you have Rome Odunze, you have Cole Kmet, who I think is above average tight end talent. It was just a weird scheme, a weird.
Wish he could literally run above average the number of routes available.
Yeah, no, I think he's an above average talent running like a third string tight end route share. So
what happened?
What's going on in Chicago?
He had 33% route participation. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, I don't get how you can watch Gerald Everett and Cole Kmet and come out on team Gerald Everett unless you just play your guys because they know your system and you're really biased, which I think maybe Shane Waldron is. Yeah, what's going on here? We'll talk here our last game, Jacksonville against Cleveland. I think, obviously the story for Jacksonville in week 1, they got off to a really hot start against Miami. I thought Brian Thomas looked really good. It looked like kind of a more well-orchestrated offensive attack in the first half, then kind of completely fell apart in the second half. Not really sure what happened there. Haven't dug into it too deeply, but curious what you think, Sack. I know you had some thoughts on the specific matchup for Cleveland's, strong pass rush against Jacksonville in this game.
Yeah, so last season, the Jags were really game plan dependent for how they chose to attack with their passing game. And you could see it when they faced teams with really strong pass rushes. So you can go back and look at specifically the games I'm thinking of last year was when they faced the Browns. The Browns are one of the top pass rushers in the league. They faced the Steelers, one of the top pass rushers in the league. They morphed their offense into something to adapt to what their opponent's strengths were. And so they really took the air out of the ball and stopped throwing deep and moved everything to underneath quick hitter stuff, so that Trevor Lawrence was not going to be in trouble facing these strong pass rushes. And so those games were ones where Evan Ingram just absolutely feasted. I think the Browns game last year was his highest scoring game of the year. He had something like 13 targets and 25 half PPR points or something ridiculous like that. But I mean, and this is how Press Taylor has done things when he's been an offensive coordinator, is he's very much going to be game plan specific and morph himself into what he thinks the best way to handle the opposing defenses. And so I feel like we have, it's all kind of small sample stuff. It's like, okay, the total number of times the Jags faced a really strong, top 10 pass rush. Like, you don't have a ton of data to go on, but they've been consistent in their approach in those situations. And so that makes me really want to try and lean into this and say, all right, I have a pretty good idea of what I think the Jags are talking about in their meeting rooms this week and what they want to do. And that's, we need to get the ball out fast. We need to not be in trouble, from their pass rush. And so I think it sets up for a really good spot for Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk. And then it's to be determined on Brian Thomas, because I don't know. We haven't seen them deploy a game plan like what I'm expecting them to do with Brian Thomas on the roster yet. He might just be their best pass catcher. So it might be something where they say, last year we used Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram short because Calvin Ridley couldn't actually run a route well to save his life. And so he wasn't going to get open in the short area stuff anyway. So we used the guys that we knew could do that. Well, maybe Brian Thomas is just really good and can do that. Now, he profiled more as like a burner, deep threat, deep ball type guy. That was his bread and butter in college. But I'm not willing to say so confidently, like, no, Brian Thomas is unplayable this week. You got to go with the guys who have been the shorter ADOT guys for them. But I do feel like it's a spot where I really want to heavily attack Evan Ingram in the dog bowl, which again are 12-person drafts. He's going to be my most drafted tight end by far. He goes pretty late. You can sometimes get him in the 5th round. Most of the time it's like the 4th round. But getting Evan Ingram there, who I think, if I was IKBing the projections a little bit and moving Evan Ingram to where I think he should be, I think he probably should project as the tight end 2 on the week if what I think about the usage is going to come to fruition. And so to get that as like the tight end 7 or tight end 8 in drafts can just be such a huge advantage, with what you're able to do at the other positions in your draft. You're taking the strong projected running backs and wide receivers earlier, and then you're just able to get a tight end that's going to project a lot better than the guys going ahead of him. And so that's probably my strongest lean for this game, is that the Jaguars are privy to the Browns' strong pass rush, and they're going to try and do what they can to counter that.
I think that's really interesting. Crane, do you have any other thoughts on the Jags passing attack this week?
That was my read as well. but I could also see them just running the ball more. The Browns didn't, and when I say that was my read, I think that the pass rush will be a big part of what the Jags are planning to do. But one way to counteract that would be to attack a Browns run defense that just faced the Cowboys, called their backfield a backup by committee. I mean, it was not good. Ezekiel Elliott led the way, but was extremely inefficient. But then on NFL Next Gen released on the pro side, you can actually see like the guys who had less than the minimum threshold, and Dowdle wasn't very good either. So I'm just like, okay, these dudes both look not great, but the Browns' run defense doesn't look very good coming out of that game. They're 28th in run stop win rate, ESPN's player tracking metric. They're 26th in rushing success rate. Like, I don't know that, if we're applying context here, they should, out of that matchup, we would expect them to look really good, and they don't. So we could see, I think, maybe ETN get a chance to redeem himself a little bit. The problem is that Tank Bigsby actually did get some run last week, and then ETN had the game-losing fumble. So how much do you believe in the Jaguars to go back to ETN specifically, as opposed to kind of continuing to work in Bigsby? And ETN was not efficient last week. He had -8 rush yards over expected, a really bad 33% success rate. But he did get used in the passing game. He had a 16% target share. So I guess ETN would maybe be like, if it doesn't flow through Ingram or Kirk or Thomas, like ETN might be one of the reasons why those guys don't have huge games, because they just lean on the running game. My primary read, though, would be that play it through Ingram, play it through Kirk, because the Browns passed a lot. The Browns were pretty aggressive about throwing the ball. That Ken Dorsey, maybe not in terms of offensive design, maybe that's not going to be very good at all, but in terms of willing to drop back, the Browns have shifted. I think they're going to be willing to air it out if necessary. So, I don't know if this game is like really going to like shoot out, but there could be a decent amount of passing volume, and a lot of it will be underneath, I think.
Yeah, I don't think the offensive design is the problem in Cleveland as much as it is the guy. From
a high level, maybe the design of who is in the offense.
Yeah, the design of who is the quarterback is certainly a problem in Cleveland. That would be my biggest concern, and maybe why I agree with the Ingram over Kirk if I'm forced to choose. I think there's a chance that in the second half, the Jags do not need to throw the ball because, man, what I saw from Cleveland in week 1, Deshaun Watson, he just can't do the quarterback thing anymore. He still can kind of avoid sacks and run around a little bit, but he has none of the creative playmaking traits that he used to have in Houston. David Njoku out now, that was like their easy button, like cheating on screens and getting some production out of that. I don't know what the answer is without him. I think it's going to be really ugly in Cleveland this week. So I'm worried about the low volume. I think with Evan Ingram, though, at tight end, you could get there with 5 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown, and that is really good at tight end. Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit worried with Kirk. Does he really have the ceiling in this matchup?
I don't know about that touchdown, but yeah, the 5 or 6, maybe even 8 for 70.
Hey, at tight end, you probably just need 5 for 50, and you lap the field. So you don't even need the touchdown. But yeah, that's a good discussion there. Interesting notes on Jacksonville's tendencies versus defensive fronts. That's all we have this week. Those are the matchups we had to cover. So, yeah, I guess I'll kick it back to you, Crane, for anything else going on at Leg Up this week that you want to tell the people about.
Yeah, we got a ton going on. We got weekly rankings, which we're going to be updating again later today. We'll also update those again Sunday morning. We got the rest of season rankings. Sam is helping us out with. We've got, as I mentioned, the walkthrough. Obviously, you can check that out. But Matt Irby has been doing a quick slant article. He got the Thursday night one out. But we have 2 more of those coming for Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football. The Sunday Night Football one is going to drop overnight tonight. So early morning, you'll have that. Monday Night Football will get out before the game as well. So check those out. Those have been really, really fun. Matt's diving deep into those matchups and kind of breaking them down. And he's doing it in a little bit of a different way than I do it. So it's nice to get kind of a different flavor and cover some angles that I wouldn't have thought to cover. So those have been really awesome. And Stephanie Miller's waiver wire column is just an absolute must read for anyone doing managed leagues, dynasty leagues. She goes really deep. So that's truly invaluable. Highly recommend checking that out. And then Sackreligious, you had an article on the BRs on kind of getting unique a little bit in these battle royale drafts. So that's another one I would really recommend people check out.
Awesome stuff.
All right. I'll get us out of here. We'll be back. So the plan is that we're going to be doing this every week. So tune back in. We're going to get, same time, early Friday afternoon. So we'll be back in terms of this channel. The other thing, if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, I'll have DFS MVP out later today as well. So look for that. Good luck in week 2. See you guys later.